Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of the Demystifying Medicine seminar series. We would like to begin by acknowledging that we meet on the traditional territories of the Mississauga and Haudenosaunee nations and within the lands protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. In today's webinar, we are pleased to be hosting Dr. Mitchell Abrams. Dr. Abrams is a Canadian radiologist educating youth, medical professionals, and the general public alike on new paradigms of health. Focusing on holistic models of health, his mission is to integrate the arts, science, and technology in support of proactive and preventative health models. Influenced by his unique journey through Western healthcare as a physician, chief of radiology, and patient, he founded a social enterprise known as NexGenHealth, which delivers a multidisciplinary approach to personal well-being and community health. Currently an associate professor of medicine at the McMaster School of Medicine, Dr. Abrams assists in the development of medical educational curriculum related to anatomy and radiology. Combining his radiology background with his spiritual learnings from India, Dr. Abrams explores energy from both Western scientific and Eastern spiritual contexts as it relates to mental health, consciousness, and interconnectedness. Empowering audiences with knowledge, Dr. Abrams continues to inspire communities to learn, heal, and grow together. Without taking more of your time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Abrams.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here with all of you, and I'm really excited to share this information with you. So today's conversation, the science of consciousness, understanding energy is the foundation of healthcare. This is a huge topic, and I thought that we would start by discussing basically the other pandemic. When we look at the leading cause of death of youth between ages 15 to 29, suicide is the second leading cause. So this is, and this was 2016, prior to COVID. So we're dealing with a mental health, pandemic within our global community. So in today's conversation, I want you to all think of this and imagine this almost like a vaccine for your mind. I want to vaccinate your mind with knowledge, skills, and some strategies to help you understand not only how to empower yourself and deal with the stress, the angst of, the chaos that you may be experiencing, but how does this affect our model of care? Now, I want to share some really interesting facts right off the bat. Here's an interesting research paper. It showed that almost 6,000 middle-aged people, those with the highest self-regulation abilities, were over 50 times more likely to be alive and without chronic disease 15 years later than those with the lowest self-regulation scores. So people that were able to control and self-regulate their emotions were 50 times more likely to be alive without chronic disease. This is huge. And here's another interesting fact. Not one, but 3 separate 10-year studies, they all concluded that emotional stress was more predictive of death from cancer and cardiovascular disease than from smoking. The paper also showed that people who were unable to effectively manage their stress had a 40% higher death rate than non-stressed individuals. So we're really starting to get a picture of understanding how important it is to understand yourself and how to learn how to self-regulate emotions. And interestingly, when you look at primary healthcare, studies have shown that up to 80% of primary care doctor visits are related to stress, but yet only 3% of the patients receive stress management help. Furthermore, in the Canadian Medical Association Journal, in May 2019, suicide was identified as the only cause of mortality higher in physicians than non-physicians. And in some cases, particularly in females, this was more than double. So what do all of these statistics say? Basically, this adds up to say that, look, learning how to self-regulate emotion is extremely powerful and extremely important when it comes to your individual health. We're also starting to appreciate that people are looking for this type of information. They're actually wanting to learn how to self-regulate, but we're also identifying that doctors, they themselves do not have the skills. they themselves are actually at higher risk of suicide than the communities that they serve. So this is kind of what we're going to address today. And before we kind of go down this road, I just want to quickly introduce, a little bit about myself. And, as Aniqa has discussed in the intro, my background is in medicine. And within the first year of medical practice, I became a patient. I had open heart surgery. And shortly after that, when I came back to work, I was then appointed as a chief of a department. So very quickly did I get to experience medicine from the bottom up and the top down. And I started to really appreciate, the gaps in our healthcare model, started to really appreciate the burnout and the degree of stress that was, permeating the entire system. But most importantly, how narrow in scope that we actually study and define health and wellness within medical school. And it was at this point I became so disillusioned that I started to travel and look at how other cultures approached health and wellness. I took a real interest in India, and I started to really, examine this mind, body, and spiritual perspective of health, particularly the spiritual sciences. And what I found amazing was that many of these spiritual practitioners that I had opportunities to connect with and learn from, many of them had such a profound understanding in the laws of physics. And in fact, many of them had physics degrees. And it bewildered me, like, why in the world would a practitioner in the remote areas of the Himalayas, why would they be interested in physics? And it was explained to me, everything is energy. Your thoughts, your emotions, these are forms of energy. So the more that we understand energy, the more you can understand your thoughts and emotions, and then you can start using them as tools for your own health and wellness. Now, for me, this was my light bulb moment. My field of medicine is fairly unique. We do not use prescription pads. We don't use scalpel blades. We use energy and our profound understanding of the laws of physics to non-invasively dissect the human body like a loaf of bread, using CAT scans or MRI machines. But yet it is purely the fact that we understand the human body, we understand the dynamics of energy and how to apply that so that we can do, things that would otherwise be considered magic 100 years ago. So now my focus in life is really, how can we help share this new perspective of energy from a very Western perspective, but also incorporating the Eastern spiritual, perspective. And so I like to use a very specific piece of art. This is called a medicinal mandala, okay? Now, this piece of art is a representation of energy, and I just want to take a moment to explain what you're all looking at. Now, when you look at what Einstein is staring at, Einstein's looking at that center piece. This is called a vector equilibrium. And the vector equilibrium represents the most energetically balanced system that we know of. And in this medicinal mandala, it represents all the Western sciences that we typically study in school, science and physics, biology, genetics, but it's all this modern Western perspective. And at the same time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, he's staring at that background flower, which is called a mandala. And the mandala has been around for thousands of years. It's been found in ancient scriptures, ancient art, and it represents the science of spirituality, the science of consciousness, our interconnectedness. And it's really, appreciating how connected we are and how to feel connected, not just to yourself, but to each other, to the planet, and perhaps even beyond. But it's the science of connection. Now, can everyone appreciate how that vector equilibrium in the middle and the mandala in the background, when they are superimposed, do you notice how they flow into each other? They seem to occupy the same space. The reason why that is because they both share a very specific mathematical ratio, a particular frequency. And we're going to tune into that frequency, and we're going to learn about it in today's discussion. Now, when you use this medicinal model almost like a lens, it helps us, have a better perspective of our interconnectedness. And it helps us truly understand, up-to-date research. Now, when you look at healthcare, the gold standard for the last 20 years in the literature, they discuss this model called the biopsychosocial model of care, or BPS for short. This is a fancy term to basically say that we are each part mind, body, and spirit. Or in this particular diagram, that blue circle is social. But that blue circle really represents how connected do you feel to yourself and to each other. Now, I want to examine initially, let's just look at the mind and the body. How are these two concepts connected? Now, Dr. Sarah Lazar, a Harvard researcher, she showed that when you take people off the street, and this is what her research design was, that by taking people off the street and teaching them very specific mental exercises, different breathing techniques, and people practice for 20 minutes a day, within 60 days, 2 months, she found that the brain structures changed, meaning that in this particular research, the amygdala shrunk. Now, the amygdala is part of the brain that actually surveys stimuli, either your external stimuli or internal stimuli, and tries to delineate what is familiar and what is not familiar. And if you're not familiar with it, it kind of triggers that fight or flight response. And what the research is showing, that by practicing these mental exercises, you actually shrink your amygdala so that you have a greater buffer zone. You do not react to the same degree of stress that you previously did. And her research is now showing that the mind is essentially like a muscle. The more that you practice, the more that you participate in these exercises, the greater the change that you will see. And literally, your brain structurally changes. Now, the literature shows, we now know that this is called neuroplasticity. Your brain is constantly changing. And subsequent research now shows that not only does the amygdala shrink, but the higher, more evolved parts of the brain, like your prefrontal cortex, which is involved in your higher level of thinking, your cognition, those parts of the brain actually thicken. So we're now starting to appreciate that the less evolved parts of the brain, like the amygdala, which was an essential part of our evolution as a species, keeping us safe from danger, these areas, which are now, unfortunately, have become hyperactive, like a very sensitive trigger finger, these mechanisms now kind of hold us back, either through fear, through anxiety. It holds us back from being the best version of ourselves. And by practicing these techniques, not only does the amygdala shrink, but yet we also expand and increase the more evolved parts of the brain. So again, when you think about muscles and you think about bodybuilding, well, sure, you can be buff, but yet that means nothing if you don't have a mental muscle to go along with it. And we have to start understanding that these techniques really help build the mind, just like the muscles can be built up, by exercise. And more so, we're really starting to appreciate that these techniques is really, a technique that drives the evolution of our species. Now, to go a step further, I want to introduce you to Dr. John Kabat-Zinn. His research shows that when people use their mind, they concentrate, getting into a meditative or mindful state, and you start using your imagination, that practice actually becomes part of your healing process. So his research in particular looked at psoriasis, which is an inflammatory condition of the skin. And they showed that when people were taught how to get into that mindful state and then start imagining and using visualization techniques, people healed 4 times faster than those who did not use their consciousness. They did not use their mind. And so we're starting to now understand the mechanisms of why we would heal faster. We're starting to understand through research that our consciousness, our thoughts, and our emotions actually affect our genetic expression. It helps modulate our hormones, our immune system, our cardiovascular system. So we know now that the mind and how we think and the emotions that we're experiencing has a profound effect of the fundamental, aspects of our existence. Now, This is Dr. Roland McCready from HeartMath. He's the lead researcher for an organization called HeartMath that has been studying the role of the heart in our health. And what they have shown is that the heart actually has nerve cells. The same cells that we have in our brains, the neural synapses, and the way that they behave, either with short-term or long-term memory, the exact same cells are found within the heart, and they behave in the exact same way. Now, what's fascinating about this is that when you actually look at the heart rhythms, all of our hearts, they have a certain rhythm, and depending upon what you are experiencing emotionally, that actually affects the rhythms of your heart. So for instance, when you look at the chart on the left, and you can see in the red graph, this is called a very incoherent heart rhythm. It's very irregular, and it's all over the place. And this is what you see when people are feeling frustrated, or they're irritated, they're feeling impatient or in anxiety. Now, compare this to the right-hand graph in blue, where you can see a very nice rhythmic oscillating heart rhythm. This is called coherence. This occurs when you are feeling, appreciated. You're feeling a sense of calm, love. You're feeling patient. You're feeling confident. All of these positive emotions actually creates a very nice rhythmic heart rhythm. And this is what we call heart rate variability. Now, why is this important? It turns out that nerve cells from the heart sends these signals back up to the brain. And specifically the area of the thalamus, which is then tasked with sending that information to the higher levels of the brain called the cortex. So when you are in a state of incoherence, when your heart rhythms are very irregular, those signals go up to the brain and it short circuits your brain. You are unable to truly function at the best of your ability. Imagine, think back the last time that you were frustrated. It's so difficult to think. Sometimes it's more difficult to make decisions when you're in that state of anxiety. Now, in contrast, when you're in that state of coherence and you're feeling like you're in that flow of life, you're feeling good, you are now operating at an optimal level. This is called cortical facilitation. You're facilitating the, operative, function of your brain. And studies now show that when you are in that coherent state, it directly affects the brain centers which are involved in foresight, decision-making, your level of being aware socially or even aware of your environment. It also helps you further self-regulate. And it goes even deeper than that, because the science shows that when you look at all of your biological rhythms, everything in your body is based on rhythms. Every system is oscillating with a particular rhythm. And when you get into that state of coherence, that nice rhythm actually creates all of your biological rhythms to start synchronizing together. In physics, this is called entrainment. When all of the rhythms become synchronized and they start to add up and become stronger together. And this creates a very optimal physiological state. Now, what's fascinating is that we know that most people, just at baseline, even when you're just not, you're just as if you're waiting for the bus, you're not thinking about anything, most people are in a state of incoherence. When people train themselves by practicing, 5 minutes a day, in 4 months, studies have shown that people can now convert their baseline level of incoherence to become coherent. So now you're kind of operating more often than not in this optimal physiological state. And when you look at the research and you see what are the outcomes when people practice coherence on a regular basis, it shows us that we have this enhanced ability to maintain composure during challenging times. It enhances our family and our social dynamics. It reduces fatigue and exhaustion. It promotes your body's natural regenerative processes. So this goes back to Dr. Jon Kabat-Zinn's work. It improves your coordination and reaction times. Coherence has actually been used since the 1970s with peak, athletes, Olympians, and even now is used in the NHL and the NFL. It also enhances your ability to think clearly, find better solutions. You improve your ability to learn and achieve higher test scores. That's all great for students. And it also increases access to your intuitive intelligence, your ability to become aware of things that, previously we thought was just not possible. So we're starting to understand that this becomes a process. These are skills and strategies that we can help unlock our greatest potential. The cool thing is that we're now at a point where we have technology, real-time biofeedback that allows us to watch our heart rhythms in real time, so that when you practice coherence, you can actually see how your thoughts and emotions are affecting your heart, and that you can actually find your sweet spot. And again, this is a fantastic meditative aid, and this has been used since the 70s with Olympic athletes, but now it's become portable, it's accessible, it's affordable. So we're now kind of entering this new age of medicine and healthcare that's very proactive and preventative in nature. Now, we've just spent the last 10 minutes discussing the mind and the body, but now let's focus in on that blue circle, the social, the science of spirituality or interconnectedness. Research now shows us that, the highest risk factor of death in a retirement home is feeling disconnected. We know that addictions, no matter what you're addicted to, is really an attempt to feel connected to something. And we also now know that a patient's prognosis correlates to how connected they feel to their practitioner or the institution that's providing their care. Now, to help you appreciate just how deep that blue circle goes, that sense of connectedness, I'll introduce you to this gentleman. This is Maharishi. Now, in the 1970s, he was quite a big deal. He's written up in Time magazine, and in 1975, he's here. He did a global tour, and he's here with, Prime Minister Trudeau at the time. And his philosophy was that when you bring people together and you teach them how to focus their intention, you get them into that state of coherence, that collective energy can have a profound effect on the communities around them. It has an effect on the people and around you. And in 1996, a group of meditators started a project, and they said, look, we're going to come together. We're going to fly into Washington, D.C., and for 8 weeks, we're going to meditate together on love, peace, and compassion for your community. And as a result of that, we believe that we will drop your crime rate by 20%. Drop crime by 20%. This was their prediction. The police chief at the time said, you guys are bonkers, and we need 20 inches of snow to drop our crime by 20%. And note that this was actually done over the months of June and July. So if you look at the green curve, the green represents the coherence creating group size. And at the end of 8 weeks, you can see that there was almost 4,000 people that gathered in Washington, D.C. The orange line represents the percent change in homicides, rapes, and assaults. You can see that it dropped by 23% by the 8th week. Now, what's fascinating is that what you don't see here is that when people started to go home after the 8 weeks and they started to go back to their native countries, crime rates slowly rebounded back to baseline levels. This research took 3 years to get published because the results were just so astounding that the research community just could not wrap their minds around it. They just couldn't believe it. But eventually it was accepted, it was published. And in fact, if you Google the Maharishi effect, you'll see that this has now been published in peer-reviewed journals, over 30 times. So this is replicable and it's now verifiable. And the interesting thing is that we actually now understand the mechanism how this happens. You see, the heart is an electrical organ. When you have an EKG, that's the tracing of the electricity flowing through your heart muscle. But we also know that anything that has electricity also creates a magnetic field. That's why it's called electromagnetism. So when you think of the heart, your heart is not just a pump. The heart, as we have already discussed, is creating these heart rhythms, which encodes your emotions, which not only sends signals to your brain, but it's sending signals out into your environment through your magnetic field, and other people's hearts react to that energy. And in fact, research shows that if there's a group of people in a room and everybody is kind of inducing a state of coherence, and if somebody's in the room that's incoherent or might not even understand what coherence is, they might not even know what coherence is, that individual is actually induced into a state of coherence by the others who are in a coherent state. So this now is starting to really appreciate, we're starting to really appreciate how important not only does self-regulation play in your own health, but how you play a role in everybody else's health. Now, as amazing as this is, and the research in business research and all of, and it's so profound, the implications of having groups and having individuals into this state of coherence when it comes to their performance, how they feel. But I think the bigger question is why? Why in the world are we designed in this way so that we actually influence each other? How our heart rhythms and our emotions are actually affecting other people. And this question why is what's so fascinating, which is also kind of part of our new narrative, not only of helping us understand who we are, but what we are as individuals and as a community. Now, to help us understand the why, let's just take a step back and think about Leonardo da Vinci. Da Vinci said, look, just learn how to see. Realize that everything is connected to everything else. Now, if we fast forward and we think about, okay, well, that's interesting. And look what Nikola Tesla said. If you wish to understand the universe, think of energy, frequency, and vibration. So to help you understand what these guys are talking about, I want you just now take a minute to imagine a celebration. Imagine, after COVID, when we can now get back together and start celebrating, imagine that we put together a huge concert, a celebration of our oneness, this new, perspective of consciousness. And I want you to imagine that you are all up on stage with me. Your favorite musician or DJ is playing music, and you see a crowd of 150,000 people all dancing and celebrating. Now, immediately you would recognize that every single individual in the crowd has their own form of expression. They're all dancing and enjoying the music. But yet at the same time, you'd also appreciate that everybody is synchronized to the exact same beat. There's a particular rhythm that everybody is connected to. And it turns out that Mother Nature, the universe, is also designing the exact same way. When you look at every rolling wave or the plants, flowers, there's a particular design and a ratio that can be identified. Now, in school, we call this the Fibonacci sequence or the golden ratio, sacred geometry. There's so many different labels. I don't really care what label that you want to use. I'm more interested that you learn how to recognize it. And the vector equilibrium and the medicinal mandala, when you think back about why they flow into each other, is because both of them have this divine ratio encoded within it. And so when you look at the arms of the galaxy or our environmental patterns, you look at every fruit, every vegetable that you eat, they always demonstrate the exact same pattern. Now, when I teach anatomy to med students, I can tell you that exact ratio is found at every part of our existence. Starting at the embryo stage, all the way through, to adulthood, the exact same ratio is identified, and you can start to identify yourself in nature at every level. And once you start to see these patterns, you start to become, you start to recognize it everywhere. Here's a beautiful example of a tree in the fall. On the left and on the right, you can see this is an angiogram, which is essentially the blood vessels feeding your brain. Now you can see that the patterns are the same. And this is now helping us to really understand our connectedness to nature. And it's not just, this ratio is not just helping us understand how connected we are to nature, but it's also helping us understand our subconsciousness. Because it turns out that how we perceive attractiveness in the world also depends on this ratio. The more that people's faces meet this particular mathematical pattern, the more attractive they are perceived in the world. So, when you have your medicinal mandala lenses on, you can really start to understand that we have identified Mother Earth's fingerprint. This geometry, this fingerprint that you can now start to recognize throughout nature and recognize within yourself, is really helping us redefine who and what we are as individuals and as a community. And when you take in, a perspective of what the Human Genome Project showed us, that we are all over 99.9% genetically identical. Just like the cells in your body are all identical. If we were to jump up and climb into my spaceship and we were to fly up to the stratosphere, you'd recognize that everybody, you, me, the whole world, we are all over 99% genetically identical. So we're now starting to understand this broader perspective of life. We could call a petri dish, a colony of cells, this is life. We can call a superorganism called a human, this is life. And at the next level of superorganism is the planet. And we have to now start to understand this perspective and understand our relationship to the whole. And what's fascinating is that Western science is now finally catching up to what the ancient scriptures have been talking about for millennia. They have such a poetic way to describe this. They say, look, we're all sparks of the same flame. Now, this is beautiful because think about it. Every brain cell in your brain is a spark in the flame of your consciousness. Now, take that to the superorganism level of Mother Earth and say, well, you, me, and everybody else, we are each sparks of Mother Earth's flame of consciousness. And when you think of that broader perspective, it really helps us truly appreciate the mind-body spiritual model of care, particularly that blue circle. It really helps us understand why we're so connected, why we are designed in a way that our heart rhythms and emotions affect other people, and that we can induce people into coherence. Just like how your body, the cells, the healthy cells in your body, helps induce all the other cells to also be healthy. Now, all of this is really leading us to a new point in healthcare, which I like to call conscious healthcare. And conscious healthcare really is fascinating because it will meet you wherever you are in your journey of life. If you are on the far end of the science spiritual spectrum, if you are very scientific, great. We can have these conversations, help you understand energy from a very Western scientific perspective. But some people are very spiritual. They don't care to appreciate, physics. They don't care to really understand all the little fine details. They know that as a spirit, they can experience this. So the biopsychosocial, the mind-body spiritual model actually really can be framed to say, look, we are all spiritual beings having a human experience. And what's amazing about this is that not only do we have the technology, that biofeedback tool so that we can train ourselves, but we can also use those same sensors to actually show that when we do it at the same time in a group, that our heart rhythms begin to synchronize with each other. And we can actually watch this on an app. So now we're at a point where we can create healthcare models that not only, really focus on you, the individual, a patient-centered model, but it also celebrates and strengthens the fact that we are part of a broader community, a whole. Now, the medicinal mandala really helps us understand this perspective, but the really interesting thing is that it also is a bit of a roadmap. It's a roadmap to help us understand how we can create a local is global approach to health. Now, I hope that, during this moment, this unprecedented, challenging time, this pandemic has really forced people to appreciate that when we talk about global health, it's not about, them over there anymore. Global health now is your backyard. We are so interconnected. And I think, now is this moment in time where people are really awakening to this perspective. So before we get into the roadmap, let us discuss the elephant in the room. The fact of the matter is, when you take what science is now telling us, how to be healthy and all the research about our interconnectedness, and you are now looking at, trying to apply this model of care in a system that was designed a long time ago. This model is designed, when you think about capitalism and the socioeconomic way of life, it's really designed around a divide and conquer. And so when you start applying, how we even approach health in today using these old models, think about how everybody is an individual, you get this picture like this. Now imagine every color is a different individual with their own unique interests, unique culture and past. And yet, everybody is separate. And you can see how it's such a two-dimensional picture. And it's just very limiting. And I can tell you as a past chief of a department in a hospital, when you think about healthcare and how hospitals are designed, this is the picture that you would see. Every color would be a different department in your hospital. Everybody is fighting for the same last dollar in a limited healthcare budget. And it does not help facilitate. It certainly doesn't, facilitate further collaboration and integration. It's all about survival, a survival consciousness. And and unfortunately, it creates a very poor working environment, very inefficient. And furthermore, we also know that feeling of separateness and disconnect is also what it's fuel to the fire. It creates disease. Now, I want to just ask you, what do you think would happen if 85% of the oxygen and the nutrients in your blood going to your brain was only used for less than 1% of your brain cells? The rest of the 99% of the brain cells are fighting over the scraps. The rest of that 15%, what do you think would happen? It wouldn't end well. It's not sustainable. It's not compatible with life. It's called a stroke. And I can guarantee you don't survive. And now, when you take that analogy and you look at what's going on in the world today, we're living in that scenario. In fact, more than 85% of global resources are owned by less than 1% of the global population. So we're starting to now appreciate why there's so much chaos in the world is because these systems and the way that they were designed is not sustainable with what science is now telling us about ourselves and each other. And in fact, these models, which were based were created at a time where we thought we understood we thought we understood ourselves. We thought we were separate from each other. And in fact, these systems really perpetuate that idea that we think that we're separate. And all of these models, our politics, our economy, everything is based on divide. Everything has become so polarized. And, again, according to the science and the biopsychosocial, this is a detriment to our health and wellness. And when you think about the viruses of today, you think that COVID, is kind of looking at us, as different nations and different people and, are concerned about the borders. No, they see, and they are, approaching this as we're one global community, just like the cells in your body are, all one. Doesn't matter if you're a liver cell, a kidney cell, a brain cell, you're part of a community and you all have to do your job to make the whole healthy. And so we're now at this pivotal moment where we have to start reframing the narrative of who and what we are. And this is the power of appreciating the biopsychosocial model and understanding our global interconnectedness. So with that in mind, let's go back to the roadmap. We have already discussed that, look, the gold standard in health for an individual is based on the mind, the body, and the spirit, BPS. Now let's look at community. What does it take to have a healthy community? Well, we know, and I think everybody would agree with me, that healthcare is the backbone of a healthy community. You need to have a good healthcare model, a healthy model, in order for you to have a healthy community. However, when you think about it, and I think the pandemic has really highlighted this, is that the practitioners within healthcare are part of your community. We are all part of the same community. And at the same time, what you need to have in order to have a healthy community and a good healthcare model, you have to have adequate education. Now, we've also discussed that the power of love, the power of our positive emotions actually synchronizes us. It brings us together. It creates a healthier, more coherent community. So when you take the science of healthy, thriving communities and you apply it with the understanding of the mind, body, spiritual model, you get something like this. You're creating a system that we know is a foundation of nature and systems that support each other. And again, all we're doing is using models of perfect balance of energy to apply it to community and community health. Now, when you apply this roadmap to a general population where everybody has their own interests, everyone is unique, it becomes so fantastic because all we say is, look, tell us, what are you most passionate about? What is your interest? And you tell us, are you a teacher or are you a seeker? And what we can do is we'll bring people together based on your passion. We bring people and we create these groups, and all of these programs are always going to be focused and help support a mind, body, spiritual perspective for you, the individual, but also designed to help the entire community. And when you apply this model, eventually you start to realize that you get this type of structure, a system. This to me is what community health should look like. A dynamic model where you as the individual, you're thriving through your own passion, your interest. You're a color, whatever color that you would identify with, you'd find yourself somewhere within this community. And this is truly a synergistic model. Now, if we were just to go back, notice that the circles, that diagram with those circles, the 6 circles, that's called the seed of life. And that, this is, sacred geometry, and it's based on the same geometries that we're talking about. Now, just to quickly just share with you something. In the middle, you see that star, that 6-pointed star. That's actually called the Star of David. And you might recognize it because it's part of the Jewish religion. But the interesting thing is that same geometry is not just found in one religion. In fact, it's found in every single culture. When we take a moment, once you learn to recognize this geometry, this divine frequency, you start to realize that it is found in every single religion and culture. And even in our First Nations, you can see that this geometry is part of their art and part of their culture. And not only that, but in the ancient scriptures, that star is found and is representing the heart chakra. Now, isn't it interesting that we're here talking about the science of heart? The heart, and this is what is so fascinating about how science is now catching up to the ancient perspectives of energy and our degree of interconnectedness. Now, when you go back and you start to look at how it's being applied to the vector equilibrium, the vector equilibrium was actually coined by this guy, Buckminster Fuller. Buckminster Fuller, he said the vector equilibrium is the 0 point for happenings or non-happenings. He said, it is the empty theater, an empty circus, and an empty universe ready to accommodate any act and any audience. What this means, what he's describing, is that this vector equilibrium is a system, and that when you use this as a foundation to create things, you can create anything and it will be always in perfect balance. Always a system of just purely, perfectly balanced systems that you can create anything with. And what's fascinating is that vector equilibrium was the foundation for the 1996 Nobel Prize in Chemistry. And furthermore, that same geometry is also the foundation of the 2010 Nobel Prize for Physics, for graphene. So we've been kind of over the years realizing that this geometry is so powerful. Even Nobel Prizes are being given to people that are kind of harnessing and leveraging this this design, Mother Nature's design. It's called biomimicry. So my question is, why are we not now applying it to, community health, to mental health? Let's take it to that next level. And in fact, in the late 70s, Buckminster Fuller, he said, look, it is now highly feasible to take care of everybody on earth at a higher standard of living than any have ever known. It no longer has to be you or me. Selfishness is unnecessary. War is obsolete. It is a matter of converting the high technology from weaponry to livingry. And furthermore, he said, nature is a totally efficient, self-regenerating system. If we discover the laws that govern this system and live synergistically within them, sustainability will follow and humankind will be a success. So what we're describing here today is essentially just picking up and running with what Buckminster Fuller was describing, back in the 70s and the early 80s. And we have the technology, we have the capacity now to do it. And I think particularly in this moment in time, there's a degree of social consciousness that people are really, wanting to move in a new direction so that the next COVID pandemic, we don't have to deal with the next pandemic. We can find ourselves on a new trajectory. Now, Bucky said, we are all called to be architects of the future, not as victims. So, as I finish off this talk, I just want to share with you that the medicinal mandala is almost like, not only a lens to help you see this world of interconnectivity, but it's like a seed. I want to seed your mind, your consciousness, help you tune in to this particular frequency. And what I love about this course and what you guys are doing as a community is that you're leveraging social media to help people tune into interesting information. And I see this is where I'm so excited to work with all of you. And I am willing to, work with you. If you have ideas, you have projects, themes that you want to talk about, I am more than happy to connect with you, work with you, and create all sorts of fun, creative projects. That being said, I want you to also appreciate that I'm a true believer in music and art. Music and art is medicine. And as you can see, using art, it's also a very powerful educational tool. We are encoding all of this knowledge around energy into this piece of art. It becomes very valuable, becomes very powerful. And when you start to layer that with music, not only can we start to learn and heal, but we can inspire each other and we can spark a celebration. The more that we celebrate, the more that people start to learn and get tuned in, the more connected that we feel. And that sense of connectedness creates greater coherence in the world, which radically shifts social behaviors. Now, the big thing that I like is that when you use these techniques and these tools, particularly social media and music and art, we can get other people really interested. We can catch other people's attention and have them also be part of the conversation. If you think of Coldplay, Chris Martin, how amazing would it be, if Coldplay starts to realize that their logo, which is called the flower of life, if they were to start to appreciate what it really means and how they're already part of this conversation and how they could use their powerful platform to help further educate, help further tune in people, help us start to celebrate this new level of conscious awareness, we're now, again, at a point where we can radically shift the global trajectory. Another example, imagine if Kim Kardashian got really interested in Nikola Tesla and she started to use her Instagram of 155 million people to get tuned into this conversation. We would be able to pivot, literally pivot within a generation, how we thought about ourselves and how we could go about, doing business together. So, an interesting quote, a Tibetan proverb said, look, if I were to tell you my dream, you might forget it. If I act on my dream, perhaps you will remember it. But if I involve you, it becomes your dream too. So, before I end, I just want to share, I know that I went very quickly. There was a lot here, in this, brief opportunity to connect with you. But I want to share with you that on social media, we've created a YouTube channel that is going to dive deeper into these discussions. So this creates an opportunity for all of you to stay connected with the conversation. And this is an opportunity to also start sharing all of the co-creative projects between what you guys are doing. I'm working with musicians around the world that are also wanting to co-create music to start celebrating. And this becomes kind of a funnel where we can help tune people in. So I will share the link with Aniqa and Dr. Ask and Simran. So if you guys are interested, I would love for you guys to join and you stay in tune. We can continue the conversation. I'm also on Instagram and on Facebook. And again, I urge you, if this resonates with you, please connect, subscribe, do whatever it is that you guys do on social media. And in that channel and in these programs, I will also describe how we're creating a bottom-up and a top-down approach. We have programs that are now educating doctors, nurses, and health clinicians as part of their professional development programs, the same material that you are now getting. And not only that, but our programs have a love it forward strategy so that people like yourselves who are engaging in this work will have opportunities to get free devices. And we'll be able to start flooding schools and youth organizations with these devices by the more participation that we get with hospitals and physicians. We also do online coherence training. And I'm teaching doctors what I call the laser protocol. Laser, which stands for lock on to your energy. You then synchronize with your energy, and then you learn to radiate and receive. This helps you connect with your energy, create a state of coherence, and then start learning how to synchronize with others. Now, I do every night, Monday to Friday at 6 p.m. Again, I do live Zoom calls where I help induce and people into coherence. It's almost like a guided meditation. You can call it online resilience training, or you can call it the sunset sync. Whatever it is, however you want to think about this, I encourage and I invite all of you to join if you want to learn how to really, leverage the power of your mind, use your mind like a muscle, and really connect in heart. And with that being said, I'll leave you with my favorite quote. Einstein said, look, the future medicine will be the medicine of frequencies. And I truly believe this is exactly where we are today. So with that said, thank you very much. And Aniqa, I'll let you guys take it from here.
On behalf of Demystifying Medicine, we would like to extend our gratitude to Dr. Abrams for sharing his experience, his expertise, and helping us understand the importance of a holistic approach to healthcare and the value of mindfulness, especially during the pandemic. So we can now open the floor to any questions. So I see in the chat we have one question. So far we've talked about the balance between the hard logic of science and to the spiritual part of society. So what's a quick thing that you could tell people who are on the far ends of the spectrum of this topic, and to get them to understand that this kind of discussion and thinking is important for overall well-being?
Well, I mean, a big part of it is which end of the spectrum are people, would we be talking to? At the end of the day, I truly believe that when you look at that mind, body, spiritual perspective, we can say with certainty that we can empower ourselves with very specific strategies that tune us in to a higher frequency. If you were to think of your consciousness almost like driving a car and you're shifting your car to different gears, you can now shift your consciousness to different levels to help you tune in to, different levels of awareness. Not only, a greater degree of awareness within yourself, but your environment, the awareness of how you're connecting with others on a social level. And this new perspective really provides people with tools so that you can become very proactive and preventative. And we know that, everybody is at a different level. Everybody has a different degree of appreciating themselves. Either, are they really intellectual, or are they all into the body, or, some people are extremely spiritual. And by just helping create a little bit more balance, a more holistic perspective, it creates now a completely new opportunity to say, look, you just need to learn to practice. And one easy way is connect with me, 6 p.m. every night for 20 minutes. And you can all practice. You all now have a choice. That's a very simple opportunity. And if you practice this for, even as short as 2 months, your brain structurally changes. And I would even go as far as to say that the very first time that you try it, you will experience something. And I'm sure that those who are already, doing some form of meditation will tell you, yeah, you feel it right away. You can experience something different within you. And so, we all have this opportunity now, and I'm creating all sorts of online opportunities to help people, be encouraged, but also I recognize, going to the gym by yourself can be sometimes difficult. Starting a new routine by yourself is very difficult. But if we do it together and we inspire each other, it becomes more engaging, becomes more fun. So, to that question, I'd say there's, lots of ways to look at it. But if you're looking for something very simple, very easy, I say, look, connect at 6 p.m. with me. I'll share with you the Zoom link, following this conversation. And, that would be a very simple technique that you can learn, you can practice together, or you can take and you can practice it on your own, first thing in the morning, 5 minutes. And once you learn these tools, it's very versatile. You can use them even in the midst of a conversation. It's not just about sitting in the corner, all zenned out. These are tools that you can be used throughout throughout your day.
Thank you so much for answering that. We also have a live question from my colleague Armin.
Dr. Abrams, can you hear me at the moment? Perfect.
Yes, I can.
A quick question regarding the application of the findings of the studies you've mentioned today. So I think it's a fair statement to say that our physicians aren't really utilizing the findings of the studies you've mentioned today. And how hopeful are you about the actual application of these things in our modern Canadian medicine in the future?
Sorry, so could you just repeat the first part of the question?
Yeah, so I was just saying in the first part that I don't think that the findings of the studies you've mentioned today are actually being utilized that often in our practice of medicine in Canada. So I was just wondering how hopeful are you that our Canadian physicians are actually going to study and investigate these topics and actually apply them to their practice?
That's a great question. So thank you. You're absolutely right. Right now, these studies are not really, on the forefront. I will say this though, that Canadian Medical Association journal about suicide, physician suicide, is now one of the top 10 journal articles in 2019. And so this conversation, particularly within Canada, is being now brought front and center. And when we start, when you start looking at the medical organizations and the governing bodies, mindfulness, meditation, all of this now is really taking, there's a spotlight on it and it's taking, front stage. And what I find very fascinating is that, I've created a workshop for doctors and nurses, and it's one of the first workshops that not only discusses energy, but it's an accredited program. So, as a professional practicing, physician or nurse, you need to have so many professional development credits to maintain your license to work. So now we're at a point in time where this content, these strategies, and we're now talking to doctors how to use these strategies, not only for your own care, but how can you best use it for your patients? How can you use it for your local community and yet still be part of this global community? And also teaching them, look what we're doing with university students. Look what we're doing with high school students, and we're using music and art to teach the communities directly the exact same information so that, alternatively, essentially, the physicians are now going to start to feel a degree of accountability to maintain a level of excellence in care. All the physicians that I know, and the particularly healthcare administrators, the CEOs and the VPs of hospitals, they all love to say that we practice evidence-based medicine. We're a center of excellence, and it's all patient-centered. Well, now here we are, we're saying, great, here's the evidence, here are protocols. We need to now apply, these practices into primary healthcare. So I'm very optimistic, and I feel very, I believe that very quickly these strategies are going to be adopted, because you can't run from the statistics. Doctors are truly starting to appreciate not only the facts of their own mental health, but they're becoming more and more open to discussing it. The COVID situation has really highlighted this to the community. So I think now it's creating an environment that not only can we kind of bring it into physicians, but the communities themselves will be in a position to say, look, we want this. We want your guidance. And how can you guide us if you're not leading by example? So this is kind of where, we're at this interesting stage. And with technology and social media, by working with students who are creating, projects that further the education of others and your communities, your peers, you are now a practitioner of health. You are now a colleague in this new conscious healthcare model, because education is health. It's part of the science of community, and it's helping us, understand who and what we are as individuals in a community. So, all of these things layered upon each other, I think really creates the perfect storm, the perfect environment for change. And that change can be very quickly.
Thank you so much. We have just one last question, live question from Aniqa.
Yeah. Hi, Dr. Abrams.
Hi.
I'm particularly interested in the concept of coherence. So I just wanted to ask, within the context of the pandemic, how is coherence impacted when you aren't physically around someone? Is it bound by the physical constraints?
Excellent question. So no, it's not. And in fact, when I was discussing how the devices can show how our heart rhythms synchronize with each other, okay? And it's using what we call the Global Coherence app. So there's an app that you Bluetooth and you connect your device to. And if let's say you and your friends created a group, you all had a device, you can say, okay, everyone, let's join, Dr. Abrams 6 p.m. and let's kind of watch not only, how our heart rhythm synchronize, but let's see how many points, coherence points that we can accumulate as a group. The interesting thing is this, there's a whole other layer to that, that app, and it's called global coherence. Right now, there are very sensitive, what they call magnometers. These machines study the magnetic fields of the Earth, and these are scattered all over the world, and they're constantly surveying the fluctuations in the magnetic field. So it turns out that our magnetic fields, particularly when we are kind of like synchronizing together and creating group coherence, it actually affects the global coherent field, which is now measurable by these magnometers around the world. So, just to reframe, just because I think this is just so important, that we each are influencing a larger global unified field. That global unified field in return affects our personal magnetic field, which in turn affects our psyche. It affects our heart rhythms. And so it's this kind of back and forth. And so if, by practicing on your own, you're strengthening your mental muscle, but you're also kind of creating a new baseline, a new coherent baseline. You become more resilient. And no matter if you walk into a room and there's people who are, let's say, having a bad day and they've got negative vibes, your resilience will protect you from that magnetic energy. And at the same time, the magnetic field of, the Earth, whatever is kind of happening at that level, you also have a degree of resilience. But we are greatly influenced by other people and by the global unified field that we are all connected to. And I know that I didn't touch about, there's so much that we could talk about, but even there's this particular frequency called the Schumann's resonance here on Earth. And it's a frequency that's at the exact same frequency that our brain waves go into that when we start to meditate. It's that calming effect. And, so we're really starting to appreciate that we can connect to a broader kind of global field of energy, either the Schumann field or the magnetic field, that global coherence. And it doesn't matter where you are in the world. I mean, right now, I'm in Toronto, you guys are wherever you guys are. And if we were all doing this right now, our heart rhythms would connect, and we not only be able to see it on the app, but we also know that it's now feeding a global field. And that global field then is influencing other people. So, in the laws of physics, some of you may have heard of the concept non-locality, quantum entanglement. We are all connected in this energetic way where distance is really relative. There really is no distance in certain perspectives, in certain dimensions. And that has to be really appreciated when we start discussing how we all influence each other on a kind of a global scale.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abrams. Thank you for your time, and thank you for this amazing talk. And thank you for answering our questions. So yeah, I think we can wrap up the talk just with respect to time right now. But yeah, once again, thank you so much, and thank you for your time.